All right, awesome. So first things first, for all of you who are tuning in now, I just want to say there's a warning for this conversation. This conversation might require rosé, just FYI, or a Modelo if you're the chief economist. So a beer or a glass of wine is going to be necessary for this one. So if you want to take a second and pour yourself a glass of wine if you're of age, or a beer, or a nice soda if you don't drink or you are underage, that's fine too. My name is Manny Akutiel, and you are tuned into Manny's Super Civic Cyber Conversations. Manny's is a physical civic gathering space in San Francisco. We had to shut down because of the shelter-in-place order, but just because the physical place is shut does not mean that the work ends. And so we're continuing our programming using the internet, using Zoom, and we're bringing our civic engagement programming to you, to your screens. And today, two quick housekeepings for this conversation. One, please do take a screenshot and share it on your social media. You can tag us at Welcome to Manny's. And two, if you have a question for Ted, the chief economist of San Francisco, at any point, you can type that question into the Q&A box. What's going to happen is Ted is going to go over an amazing slideshow moment that he's created for us. I'm going to interrupt him intermittently if I have a dumb person question. And then if you have a question throughout the whole thing, just type your question into the Q&A box, and then we're going to go back and answer everyone's question. So as a reminder, pour yourself a glass of something.
2 shots of vodka.
Tag us at Welcome to Manny's, and if you have a question, ask the question. Okay. First, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, Ted.
Clink.
Clink. Okay. So before we get into the slideshow moment, can you just tell everyone what it means that you're the chief economist of the city and county in San Francisco?
What it normally means is that still means this. I'm looking at legislation that gets introduced in City Hall every week, and we write economic impact reports so people know how that legislation will affect the economy. We also are always watching the city's economy, never more so than now. We're doing various special reports on economic research issues, but for the past month or so, or 6 weeks, it's all been about figuring out what's going on, reading projections, and trying to chart a way forward for the city's economy.
Got it. And that's what your current life is all about.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get right into the slideshow. I am going to be your slideshow. So let me just do this right here and just say next when you want me to go next.
Okay.
And actually, before we do that, if everyone could just raise their hand that's here, we just want to see who's here. So if you're a participant, go ahead and press the raise hand button so we can see who's here. Charlie and Daniel and Annie and Susanna, Sangeeta, Leah, a lot of people. This is a very, very packed call. We have a lot of people tuning in. I see a lot of you raising their hands. Wow. Welcome, everyone. Do raise your hand if you're here so I can see you all. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, let's get into the slideshow. Share screen moment. Okay, great. And if you can't see it, operator, can you see it? Just type in if you can. All right, go. Ted, can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead.
So I have to say, for people studying the economy and studying recessions, this is it's a very difficult time, strange time for 2 main reasons. I mean, first of all is the speed and the scope of what's happened to the global economy in the past couple of months, the U.S. economy in the past month. So one thing is the speed, and the other thing is we're used to dealing with a certain set of things going wrong when a recession happens. And they're economic factors. They're things like, do we have too much investment in this? Was there too much debt issued to these people? Where's the imbalance? What's causing this mess? How's it going to get better? We have all that this time, and we have a bunch of things economists don't know anything about. So a lot of economists, including me, are pretending to sound smart about them. We need to know a little bit about them, but they're public health stuff, they're epidemiology stuff. Everything every economist will tell you about an economic forecast, and I'll share some with you tonight, is hinging on a set of assumptions about the course of the virus that we really don't know about. So at least what I can do is make clear what I think some of the assumptions underlying these forecasts are and how they can change if our story about the virus needs to change. So let's go to the first slide, which is just going to talk about what's another thing that's different about this recession is it's not caused by the economy running out of gas. You know, in February, the economy in San Francisco had like 2% unemployment. And what's happened since then is directly or indirectly, 14,000 businesses that employ 166,000 people have either been told to quit, stop doing business. That's everybody in the arts, entertainment, and recreation business. That's all of manufacturing. That's every retail trade that isn't doing food and medicine. A lot of wholesale trade, not a lot of office workers, but a lot of people in sort of blue collar industries in San Francisco have been told to close. And then there's a set of other industries that have been heavily, heavily impacted. Construction, almost totally shut down. Restaurants, you can only get takeout. Real estate, you're not forced to close, but you can't do open houses, you can't do tours. Hotels, they're currently at 8% occupancy, was what I heard today. So
Wow.
between the two of the people who are told to close and are just the shelter in place order is so restricting their operation that they're heavily impacted, you're talking about north of 20% of all the jobs in San Francisco. And again, this has happened in the past month. It was a month ago yesterday that the shelter in place order was issued in San Francisco. These businesses are generating about $3 billion a month in sales. They're paying about $1 billion a month in payroll. So all of that is currently a missing piece in the San Francisco economy for every month that this goes on.
So can I just ask, what is gross
Yep.
receipts for those who don't know what that means?
Gross receipts is basically sales. We're getting this from San Francisco's business tax filings, and we have a gross receipts tax. It's kind of like a sales tax.
So this is money that the city would normally be getting from them.
No, this is money that the economy would normally be getting. In other words, these businesses would normally be getting were they open for business and customers were giving them this money.
See.
The $1 billion is what their workers would normally be getting.
And the two different food service, there's food service on the bottom,
yep,
and food service on the top. Are those restaurants that are totally shut down like mine, and then restaurants that are kind of shut down, or what's the difference?
No, the first one is bars, which cannot do anything. And the second one is restaurants, which are allowed to. And the reason we say partially is because some of them are like yours and totally shut down, can't do takeout, and some are open for takeout and they're just not doing much business.
Okay, and what's certain services on the top?
Certain services is a phrase, a tax.
Is that like miscellaneous?
It's you have to be a real economics nerd to know what it is. It's stuff like repair shops that aren't auto repair because they're essential businesses, but like your TV shop. It's also personal services like beauty salons, barbershops. They can't do business. It's a lot of nonprofits.
I see. Hey, so folks who are tuning in, if you have questions about specific slides, this is only like a 10 slide show. So if you have a question, write your question in now and then type in the slide that it was in and we'll go back to it, okay? So don't worry, if you have a question about a specific slide, we're gonna answer it. Just type it in the Q&A. Slide 2, I had a question about this. All right, Ted, do you wanna move on?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So one of the things that happens when there are mass layoffs is people file for unemployment insurance. And what this slide is doing is looking at, because an economist like this information because we get it every week. It's the fastest information we get. So looking at unemployment claims for the United States as a whole, for California, for San Francisco, and for Santa Clara County through March. And we're expressing this here as a percentage of the total labor force. So basically, it's looking at unemployment grow during March. And by the end of March, where are we basically at? The United States is over effectively 10% unemployment just from people who've been laid off in March.
Oh my God.
California is like 13% unemployment. We are, for a reason that I don't know the answer to, but it's very interesting, we're significantly better off as a city than the state of California, even though we have a very big tourism industry and they've gotten nailed. And Santa Clara County is doing considerably better than us, but the state as a whole, that is just absolutely awful, and it's only been 4 weeks.
Do you think that's because of technology and office workers?
It probably is. It probably
Okay.
is. Like, we're higher than Santa Clara because we don't just have tech. They don't have a lot of tourism down there.
And you might get to this, but when was the last time California had a 13% unemployment?
It had something around that level during the Great Recession. I mean, California was one of the states that got really nailed. San Francisco's monthly unemployment peaked at around 10%. I don't
Hmm.
expect this is going to stop for a while or even slow down. So this number, again, 22% of the people who work in San Francisco are in these fully or partially impacted businesses.
Right, right,
And
right.
they can't keep, you can't keep paying them forever when there's no money coming in the front door.
Right, and this is the week ending March 28th, and we're already in
Yep,
mid-April, so we don't
that's
we
right.
don't even know what's next. Last question: why do you think California is worse than the rest of the country? Is it because of all the people that come here on tourism and hotels and that kind of thing?
I don't know. We have a lot of retail. There's a lot of tourism related stuff in Southern California. This data doesn't give us a lot of detail on which
Okay.
industries get hit, and we won't really see that for a few more weeks.
I also just have to say, as someone that has color deficiency, I really appreciate your choice of colors here because I can clearly see the different bars. Sometimes economists use colors that are very close to each other, and people like me who can't see colors very well have a lot of trouble. So I just want to point out and say thank you for that.
Sure. Well, actually, where I was trying to go there was making San Francisco the bright one, and then the others are,
Oh, I love it.
yeah.
Great.
This is like the killer chart to me, and it's going to take some explanation, but this is a chart going back 10 years. And it's showing, the orange line is showing for the US as a whole, those unemployment claims every month, starting from March 2010 up to March 2020. And they're measured on and of course, it's a boring chart until March of this year, when suddenly we went from about 150,000 claims in April to 22 million claims since March 1st. And I'm cheating here by adding April in there. So we're over 22 million in the US initial claims for unemployment since March. And the blue line, which is on the exact same scale, is the total number of jobs that have been created in the United States in the last 10 years. So what this chart is showing is 1 month of shutdown has knocked out 10 years of job growth for the United States. And if these people actually land on the unemployment rolls, we will have just rolled back 10 years, one of the best 10 years in American economic history. We will have rolled that back in 1 month.
And of course, the irony, Ted, is you just came to Manny's not too long ago, a matter of months ago, and we were looking at all of this progress, and it was a very different conversation. We were talking about how amazing things have been, in some respects. And so it's just
We
crazy
could
how
have
things
done. We could
change.
have had this conversation in February, and it'd be basically the same story.
Yeah.
I remember doing a presentation for the controller's office staff in January. And I said, there really isn't a lot of risk for a recession in 2020. As long as this coronavirus thing stays in China. So it was like good news with an asterisk. And of course, that was not a good assumption to make.
Oy vey. Okay, should we go to the next one?
Yeah, let's go to the next one. So everything else kind of pales with that, but I made this chart first, and it's still kind of another showing
I'm
how
sorry. That
quickly
last
things have
chart.
dropped.
That last chart requires me to pour a little bit more
Yeah,
rosé.
exactly. This is like a drinking game.
I know. Oh God, this is really hard. Okay, light
Um,
vehicle sales.
so light vehicle sales isn't just an indicator I fell over that has a really bad trend, although it does. So this is like, again, going back 10 years, the recession, nobody bought cars. People have been buying a lot of cars. And all of a sudden in 1 month, car sales dropped by 35%. Across most of the United States, auto dealers are open. And if you want to buy a car, you can. So this is not the shutdown. This is just everybody saying it's not the right time to buy a car in a big way. Like, again, an unprecedented drop. And again, this is an important indicator because it's kind of like, other than a house, it's the biggest thing people buy. And it's a financial commitment. And most people get it on financing.
Got
So
it.
they're basically taking on 3, 4, 5 years of debt. And
Got
so
it.
again, 6 months ago, they're like, things are fine, I'm happy to take on that debt. As of March, nobody wants to do that. This is important because the thing that's been keeping the US economy going, certainly for the last couple years, is consumers feeling like, feeling good about spending money. Consumer debt is under control, job until March, jobs were still growing, wages were still growing. So the consumer sector of the economy was doing well and consumer confidence was high. And that was pushing forward the US economy through a bunch of other things that were not so hot. So when you see this sign of consumer sentiment, this is basically telling you consumer psychology is going to need to change before we're back out of this recession that we suddenly found ourselves inside of.
I can tell you in a micro example, Ted, I got my stimulus check and I was thinking this morning, I really want a bidet and maybe I'll get a bidet. But then I looked at the bidet costs and I was like, oh God, this is like, first of all, bidets are very expensive, at least the good ones. And two, I was like, well, should I really spend my stimulus check on a bidet? Maybe I'm going to need it, over the next 3 months to kind of handle business basically. And so that's my version of this. Okay.
I think everyone is thinking things like that when they're thinking about durable goods that are going to last a long time and they've already got something that's okay. Maybe this is not the time for a new one.
Maybe it's not the time for a bidet.
Yep. Or a new one. If you had an old one, you're set, but
I don't.
Oh, well. I'm not going to touch that whole topic. Although, I've heard, I will. I've heard that they're a good investment, and I'm not going to say anything more other than that.
Actually,
I've heard they're a good way to go.
If you think about it, you're saving money on toilet paper. I thought if you spend $10 on toilet paper a month, actually, if you think about how much a bidet lasts over 3 years, it kind of works itself out. But that's a different conversation.
Have me back for that one.
Okay.
In this world, economists have been sort of crumpling up papers and throwing them away and starting over from scratch. And Moody's, who's a forecaster we pay attention to because they're very honest about the assumptions they make. This is showing their January forecast, which was sort of boring 1.8% growth every quarter. And then as recently as March 23rd, they're like, well, the first quarter will be a little slower. We'll see trouble in the second quarter, a little trouble in the third quarter. By the fourth quarter, we'll be fine. And then 4 days later, they're like, no, the bottom is going to drop out of the US economy in the second quarter. And this is important. Notice in the third quarter, they're like, and we're going to see really big growth in the third quarter. And the fourth quarter, we'll also see faster growth. The other thing to notice about this is you're looking in this projection at about an 18% drop in GDP annualized in the second quarter, which is a huge, huge drop, like Great Recession level drops.
Wow.
The 12% drop in the third quarter is a really, really rapid rebound, but it's not as fast. So this is getting you to a scenario in which really rapid drop, pretty rapid rise, but not as rapid. And so you're in a recession and you're climbing out of it. And so the real question among the forecasters who are doing this is what does happen in the fourth quarter and the third quarter? I don't think, which is just, if you're not an econ nerd, we're talking about July, August, September. Nobody.
I know, I had to count on my fingers to figure out when that was.
Everybody knows that the period we're in, April, May, June, is going to be a disaster because you don't even need to be an economist. Just sort of look at the slide the first slide I made. If you're forced to close, that's bad for the economy.
Right.
This forecast, and they're explicit about it, which I appreciate, assumes that coronavirus cases in the US peak in May, and by the end of June, they are abated. It's the sort of bell curve that if you're watching the model at the University of Washington, the IMHE model, they're projecting that's what will happen if the country continues to do social distancing until the end of May. That's the curve flattening thing. And then you can reopen in July, and then you'll see rapid growth.
And Moody's is the most respected one, right?
I respect them because they're very detailed about what they're assuming, but I would say they're among the most respected. I'm going to give
Okay.
you, there's actually a panel of forecasters called the blue chip forecasters. There's 45 professional forecasters, and
Wow.
the blue chip kind of picks the one in the middle and says that's the consensus. And so that's what I'll be talking about later,
I
because
see.
I
I
think
see.
that's a reasonable way to do it.
Okay.
We
Next
can go on to
slide.
the next slide. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is that consensus forecast. They asked the 45 forecasters, what are you projecting for the next 4 quarters and next 2 years? And the average is this past 3 months ending March will be bad. The next 3 months will be awful. And then you're going to see relatively rapid growth. But still, it's going to be till the end of next year until the economy, and I'm just talking about GDP here, not jobs, is back where it was.
Mm-hmm.
If that's true, and that's a big if, because as I mentioned, that's resting on a set of assumptions about what happens with the virus. Basically, you've got 3 months of virus followed by a year and a half of growing your way out of the recession. If that happens, that'll be a pretty short recession. The blue line is the Great Recession, which lasted for about 4 years before you were
Mm-hmm.
finally back out of the Great Recession. You didn't have as sharp a drop, but you also didn't have as fast a growth out of it. So recessions are different, and that's what the sort of average forecaster who does this for a living is thinking this one is going to do.
Can I just ask, like,
Mm-hmm.
what is the thing that is getting this V curve up to
Yeah.
the 100%? Is it the federal stimulus? Is it people employing people more? Like, what is actually getting us out of the recession?
The federal stimulus helps a lot, particularly if we're talking about an event that ends at the end of June, because people will still have money in their pocket. But I think the real thing is, unlike a recession that's caused by kind of economic factors, where it just kind of peters out and people stop buying stuff, and so businesses start laying people off, and it becomes this sort of vicious cycle. Everybody in this scenario on July is going to be desperate to go to a restaurant, and they're going to be desperate to go to a show. Like, this is,
Girl, don't I know? I need to go to a
yeah,
gay bar. I need to go to
exactly.
a gay bar yesterday, basically.
Right. So that V is those people saying, I'm so sick of shelter in place. I just want to go on vacation, or I just want to buy stuff. And then the vicious cycle turns itself around relatively quickly.
OMG, so excited. Okay, should
Yep.
we go to the next one?
Sure. So none of these blue chip forecasters work in San Francisco, but I took this model, or this forecast, and used a model that we have of the city's economy. And I sort of said, what if these national assumptions come to pass? What does that mean to San Francisco? And these are sort of the numbers for those who are into the wonkiness of it. We'll have it'll be slightly less bad. So the US is looking at about 4% drop in GDP. We're looking at 3.2. Our job growth won't be that bad. Our unemployment rate, and this is the average for the year. So this is counting the 6 months of assumed growth in the second half of the year. The average would still be about 7%. It would improve in 2021, but even by after 2021, you'd still be at unemployment that is twice what it was last year. So we're going to, even in what I consider to be an optimistic or a pretty cheerful US scenario, and even in this, which is basically saying San Francisco is going to do better than the country as a whole, we're still looking at, double the normal unemployment for the city 2+ years from now. And it's not unrealistic to think we could be talking 2023 before we're back to where we just were in 2019. And that is an optimistic scenario, I have to say.
Do you think that there's going to be a flight of the technology companies or the folks who've been large employers in the Bay Area because of this?
I doubt it, for 2 reasons, at least 2 reasons. First of all, I mean, one of the insane charts I didn't make that I could have made is the chart showing the NASDAQ stock index. You'll remember that from our last conversation last year. There
Yes,
was
yes.
these stock options. So the NASDAQ, which was up again today, is higher today than it was on January 1st of this year. Like it had a
Wow.
drop and it's actually up for the year. And the stock
Wow.
market is insane. And this particular index in the stock market is extremely insane. But it's reflecting the fact that, well, Amazon is a tech company and Amazon is saving everyone's life right now by delivering their stuff. And Instacart is a tech company. And tech companies are not forced to close. So they're doing their business. They're in many ways an essential business. They're getting customers used to the idea, like Zoom, of doing things with technology.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, people are going to be forced or deciding to use technology more than they did in the past. That's good for the sector. Now, would they move out of San Francisco? I doubt it. They haven't moved
Mm-hmm.
out of San Francisco yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see, again, it looks like from the very, very scant evidence we have so far, San Francisco is doing better than the rest of the country. So there's no real reason for an exodus for San Francisco. But I definitely don't think this is a tech-led recession. And tech will probably do better than other industries.
Got it. Okay.
If we had a lot of malls, I would be worried about an exodus.
Got it. Okay. Should we move on?
Yeah. So again, if this is accurate, this median blue chip forecast, and my applying it to San Francisco, then this recession for San Francisco looks relatively mild compared to the ones we've had in the past. Like we're talking about 1 year of job loss instead of 2 years for the Great Recession or 4 years in the dot-com recession. You know, we had close to 9% unemployment in 2009. We're looking at less than 7% in 2020. Our job loss will be less than a dot-com boom. So, I mean, it's in the neighborhood. It's certainly going to be a recession. It's just not going to be the worst recession in San Francisco if this projection that the national forecasters are making comes true. So my last slide is...
Can I just say, it's just really
sure.
not fair because I was born in 1989, and the fact that I had to deal with all this shit in my lifetime is just annoying. Like, the Great Depression, that happened, and then, you know, then there was some time, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it just
right.
feels, it's just not fair that my generation has to deal with all this bullshit when we're just trying to make it happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I would say, I mean,
I opened up my small business a year and a half ago. Come on.
Right.
People.
No, that was not. Here's the thing though, the 1990s, you were probably too young to fully enjoy it. The 1990s boom
I enjoyed it.
Was a very long economic boom. And the 2000s economic boom was a really long economic boom. And the 2010s economic boom was the longest economic boom in US history. So your generation's experience is way more boom and bust than like people born in 1947. But you've also had some good times that like people born in 1947 didn't get until the 80s. Like the U.S. economy was sort of treading water for 20 years there.
That is vague.
Not to make you feel bad.
That is vaguely comforting, Ted. That's vaguely comforting. But I feel like my generation has had to endure great emotional instability from all this shit happening. You know what I mean? It's just not. It's like, really, we elected Donald Trump. We had the longest war in American history. We had 9/11, and now we have a pandemic. Come on now.
No, that's all true. And, you know, there's a lot of other things that makes it difficult being in your generation other than economic booms. Yeah, which again, invite me back. We'll have more beer and discuss that. But I don't have any slides on that.
Okay, next one.
Yeah, this is my last slide. So if this is accurate, mild recession, but is this a big if? So I want to sort of, on my last slide, step away from kind of what the forecasters are saying might be likely or the average forecaster is saying, and really talk about what could happen without kind of attaching labels to it.
Okay.
So people like, I would say, the blue chip forecasters at this point are making a set of assumptions, as I said, about what you might call a brief virus emergency. Single peak. Once the virus is gone in June, we're like South Korea. We sail through, the virus is gone.
Let's hope.
And that's the virus story. So both of these things, there's two things going on. Like I said at the beginning, there's a virus thing going on and there's an economy thing going on. And if you believe we're going to have a brief virus emergency and consumers really want to get out and go to those shows and the price of oil stays low so people aren't spending money on gas and the federal stimulus winds up in people's pockets and you're like, you know what, I still have some money, let's go out and spend, then you get a V-shaped recession. And then you get the story I've just been talking about.
Let's do it, people. Come on, shopping.
There could, however, be a situation where you do have the virus, end in June, but people are like, I still don't want to buy that car. I still got to catch up on my back rent. So I can't go to those restaurants as often as I used to. I really like Instacart and I really like Amazon. So I'm never going to a food court at a mall again. So all of those businesses go to the wall. And the more that this leads to like long-term changes in consumer behavior, the bigger the recession gets. Because then it's not just like, oh, remember that wacky 2 months where we had to stay at home? What a distant memory. Then it's like, no, this is the start of a major economic change. Now, the shorter the virus, the less likely that is to happen, but that is a likelihood. And what that means is you're in what's called a U-shaped recession. You hit a bottom, and when you're at the bottom, even if the virus lets up, nobody wants to go shopping, nobody wants to buy anything, nobody wants to hire anyone, and you're still at high unemployment. And
Okay,
that
quick
takes
question.
you to a distant story.
Historically, is there a way for the government and the public life to move people so that it is a V-shaped recession and not a U-shaped recession?
Yes, and that is called government spending. And the good news of an economic policy is there isn't any fight about deficits. There was like the $2 trillion is a very, very big stimulus. And the Fed, although I certainly have questions about what they're spending the money on, the Fed is flooding the financial markets and no one is, they cut interest rates to zero and they're giving no one any reason to panic. Basically, you could be buying the junkiest debt from the shadiest oil company and the Fed is basically going to say, oh, no, we want to make sure that company can sell bonds. We'll buy that company's bonds. Okay, so not even those investors is the Fed allowing to panic. So they're just like spraying a fire hose on any kind of financial panic. And the federal government, $350 billion of loans to business that you don't have to pay back if you're giving it to your workers and your landlord. Well, that helps, and the IRS checks helps.
Quick question on that. So if the government, everyone's talking about like, okay, say that you don't have to pay rent. Say that people don't have to pay their mortgage for a month or two. Is that going to have a shockwave on the economy if that ends up happening?
You're kicking the can down the road. And the other thing that's going on is banks are no longer, they've suspended what's called generally accepted accounting principles about declaring how bad the debt that you own is. So you don't have to tell, if you own somebody's mortgage and they're not paying because their tenants are not paying them, you don't have to tell anybody that you're sitting on a pile of stinky debt because we're all hoping for a V-shaped recession. And, in which case everything stops. You start paying your rent, your landlord starts paying their mortgage and just, everybody winks at each other and nothing bad ever really happened. But if the recession goes on, it starts to smell. And then people are like, I don't know about this bank.
So my question then is so this is all based on Moody, right? So that Moody forecast is this basically gets back to normal in June?
Yep.
Which, the fact that a lot of people are saying May 15th seems like somewhat likely.
Well, I don't think, I mean, to answer the if question, and again, I don't want to stray too much out of my field as a non-public health expert. It's great that this very blunt object we've been using for the past month to get people to stay at home has helped in the sense that the number of new cases is going down and we're on the right side of the curve. What we've got to do to really get out of this is get the number of new cases so low that you can start managing new cases in a different way the way we should have done the first time around. Like the shelter in place has basically given us a second bite of the apple to do what South Korea did and just find everybody, test everybody, find everyone who's test positive, find out everybody they've been in contact, quarantine them all, and just handle it that way and let everybody else get on with it. If you don't have the capacity to do that, then you run the risk of when you allow things to open up again that you have another outbreak and you have to do it again.
Yeah.
So to just close off the last part of this chart, the sort of different virus story is you don't have a May peak, you may have several peaks, and you may be doing shut down, open, shut down, open.
No.
People are saying, or some sort of, slight opening, slight shutting, people are saying it could be a year plus to get a virus. I mean, to get a vaccination. And the vaccination is really the end of the virus. But until you get to that, and until you get to a place where you reach the so-called herd immunity level where so many people have it that the virus can't propagate anymore, we're nowhere near that. You're looking at a situation where still a lot of people are at risk of getting this, and it's got to be managed. And if you don't have a surgical way of managing, a really tailored way of managing, you have to manage it in the bluntest way we have. So what that means, the best case scenario in that virus world is consumers are still dying to come back. It's just they're going to have to wait longer. So that's a different U-shaped recession. And then the absolute worst case scenario is you've got so much drama about the virus that you give more people time to say, you know what, I'm loving Netflix and I'm loving Instacart and I'm loving
God,
Amazon and I'm loving my home. Yeah.
So need to get out of here immediately. Yep. Okay.
So anyway, that takes you to like a structural recession where some of these industries and some of these activities are kind of a longer term risk, and it's a slower process of adjustment. So we all hope that one doesn't happen, but you have to put it out there as something that could happen. And I don't think it's the most likely thing, but it could happen.
Okay. I've asked a lot of questions and we have a lot of questions. So I'm going to now cease my questions, even though I have so many more. And I'm going to get to audience questions. Okay, Ted?
Great.
Albert asked if we can get a copy of the slides. Is that okay with you?
It's fine with me.
We'll send it to everyone that's registered. Fran asks, are there 3 billion and 1 billion monthly numbers or annual numbers? That was from the first slide. They were monthly.
They were monthly and they were millions.
There were millions. It was what?
Oh no, I'm sorry. The first
there
slide.
Were millions.
Yeah, it's 3 billion in gross receipts per month and 1 billion in payroll per month for San Francisco businesses.
An anonymous question: is there a backlog of unemployment claims yet to be processed, causing this to undercount unemployment claims actually filed?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I would have thought that the first couple weeks of the spike. It looks like the ones released yesterday are a little bit lower, which means they're not hitting that backlog number. So I think it's absolutely possible, but I think it's less likely.
Okay, I have chicken wings kosher, don't worry, in the oven, and so if I don't want them to burn, so if that's why I went up and checked them. Thea, do we have a sense as to how quickly the economy would come back if we weren't shut down?
If we weren't shut down and we didn't have to worry about the virus and the virus magically went away tomorrow, I think the economy would come back pretty fast.
Okay. On slide, Ross asks, on slide 5, isn't this just creating pent-up demand that will be unleashed after this thing is over? And slide 5, I don't remember. Ross, look at you asking complicated questions. Slide 5 was the one about with the light vehicle sales dropping 35%. Yep. Isn't this just creating pent-up demand? Okay, that's a good question.
That's right. I mean, you've got a car. Let's say there was no coronavirus. You would have been one of those people who bought a car in March and you're not buying it. But your car is still a month older, and so you're still getting to the point where you need to buy a car. So it's not saying that you're never going to need a new car. It's really an expression of your confidence in the economy more than the fact that you've just said to forget cars, I'm going to start taking the bus. There is a phenomenon that's going on, and everybody's got two kinds of consumption. The kind where you can defer consumption, like you're going to eventually buy a new car, And then you have like what's called demand destruction. Like if I'm not buying lunch, in Little Saigon because I'm not going into to Civic Center to work, when I get to go back to City Hall, I'm not going to have like 3 lunches a day. Like that business is gone. So the real economic loss comes from the last of the things that you're never going to backfill.
Got it. Okay. David asks, was debt really in control before COVID-19? Doesn't our consumer debt currently match pre-Great Recession levels? It seemed like people kept upgrading cars, homes, luxury goods.
I think I don't have the figures at the top of my fingers, but I think only auto debt was getting sketchy. Overall consumer debt was pretty much in control. And the thing you've got to remember is that line I was showing of the increase in jobs of 200,000 a month, that was still happening until this year, 10 years later. And that's consumer spending. When that person who's been out of the labor force finally gets into the labor force and gets a job, that the expansion has gone up long enough to take more and more people into the labor force. That's new consumer spending, and that's driving spending without increasing debt, even though we have pretty low unemployment.
Steve says that you can buy a bidet for $30 on Amazon. Steve, that is not going to be a high quality bidet. First of all, I need one that's going to be able to alternate its strength and pressure. I want one that's going to be able to dry as well. You want the one with the little white noise. If I'm going to get a bidet, it's got to be all the way. Okay? So don't try to sell me a bad bidet. Next, Ross says, slide 7
Is
makes
that a
me
question
think,
to me?
No, that was to me. That was a statement and I had to respond to it. Slide 7 makes me think of the terms V-shaped versus U-shaped recession. Ross asked, have we ever seen a V-shaped recession before in history?
The 2001 recession nationally was pretty V-shaped. And the reason was 9/11, which we talked about before, which was like, okay, the skies above America are shut down, so there will be no flying. And everybody's like, and then everybody's like, well, I'm afraid to fly. And then eventually people stopped being afraid to fly and the overall economy snapped back pretty quickly. It was a really bad recession in San Francisco because of the dot-coms, but nationally that was a reasonably V-shaped recession. But I would agree that, for the past 30 or 40 years, we've had big periods of economic growth and then pretty deep recessions.
Okay, and I just want to point out to all the people who are tuned in, if you want to help Manny's avoid a recession, you can go into the chat box and there's a link. It's joinit.org/o/Manny's. You can become a sponsor of Manny's. It's $36 a month, and it's what's going to sustain us so that we don't lose our space. So before you leave, if you have to leave, please go to joinit.org/o/Manny's in the chat box and make a one-time donation, or even better, become a sponsor. Okay, Brian, slide 7, and this is the rosé moment right here. Is there a risk that the pandemic recession triggers economic factors that contribute to an even bigger recession?
Can you remind me what slide 7 is? Or let me see.
Slide 7 was the V curve, the orange V curve versus the slower blue, the 4-year. It takes 4 years for the 2008 recession to get to 100%. And really what it's saying is like, hey, we get out of this pandemic, but then the government says restaurants can only operate at 50% capacity, and stadiums can't have any events, and hotels can't have, and it's like that actually makes us go even farther down.
That is not, so that response to the virus is not what the economists are assuming, and that's the biggest weakness in these forecasts, is they're literally assuming what the IMHE people are saying, which is, no more cases. The virus is out of the United States at the end of June. So there's no reason for restaurants to be half full. There's no reason to stop stadiums. If that's not the world we're living in, then restaurants go from 100% empty to 50% empty, and you still might not make it as a restaurant with 50% of your customers. It might not work. So yes, that's absolutely right. That could happen.
All right, Veronica, what will be the impact of office spaces closing out because employees no longer go back to their offices since they're asked to continue to work from home on San Francisco?
It's a, if the question is what does it mean for San Francisco real estate, it's one of those industries that could be sort of structurally permanently affected by this. if we all realize that working at home is not that bad, and technologies like Zoom work, it ties into the question you asked earlier, and people have asked me this before, of like, if people are working at home and you've got a big tech industry, San Francisco, why doesn't everybody just move to where housing is cheap and work at home there? And and I would say that people who've thought about this in the past have found that people who do work at home still don't move to places where where places are cheap, because they're not in their jobs long enough. And if you move to Indiana or like the Ozarks, which is a lovely place to live, and your startup goes belly up, you're not going to get another startup job in Arkansas. So you need to be here finding your next job. So I don't think that's going to lead to an exodus, but it could be bad news for commercial real estate if people feel they just don't need it as much.
And just on that, do you think that this might affect the rental market and make rents cheaper in San Francisco?
I mean, the recessions always make housing cheaper, but the reason it makes housing cheaper is because people just don't have the money to pay what they paid before. And so housing ironically becomes cheaper but less affordable, because people are kind of stretching to pay the rent. They've got less money and things. Housing is not a luxury. And if you need to move because you lost your job, that is a big income shock and a big housing shock. That's not making your housing more affordable.
Okay, Jim asks, Ted mentions that construction has been shut down. There is a lot of construction on residential and public work projects going on around him. What's the status of construction, and can more projects be allowed to get underway? Are you aware of that?
Under the shelter-in-place order, affordable housing construction is allowed. And I believe public works kind of maintenance is allowed, although don't quote me on that.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways. I mean, I do think that construction is one of those industries, and manufacturing is another one of those industries, where they're going to need to figure out a way to do it safely. And of course, the workers have to buy into it and feel like it's being safe. But it's the kind of thing that you could imagine working in an environment where, like, you have to stay 6 feet away from each other and wear PPE. And that's probably what returning it will look like. Maybe that won't mean every project. I'd say the bigger risk to construction post shutdown is that developers are going to be very leery because of this, potentially bad debt owing to rents, the housing market uncertainty. It's not going to be it's going to be a risky time to start a new project.
Got it. Thea asks, we need a moratorium on mortgages and rent for 3 or more months. Can San Francisco do that or handle that?
We right now have a moratorium on evicting people for non-payment of rent while the governor's executive order is in place, which is currently scheduled, I think, to end in May and could be extended by the governor. You would still, under current law, have to pay back the rent. I think that you have a 6-month grace period to pay back the rent that you didn't pay there. However, there is new legislation that's just introduced this week to prohibit evictions of people at any point in the future for not paying rent they didn't pay. So that is a debate.
Which would kind of, in spirit, just make it so that people wouldn't pay it because you couldn't get evicted for not paying it.
That will probably be part of the debate on that one. Yes.
Okay, a lot of people are talking about this, and I'm thinking about this too. McKean asks, we're all happy with the federal stimulus, but aren't we concerned about the federal deficit adding $2 trillion in debt? That also doesn't include what they might now be, approving in the next round of stimulus. Are millennials going to need to figure out how to deal with this national debt eventually?
Of course, yes. And you'll have to figure out.
What does that mean? What does it mean to have trillions of dollars of national debt?
So big deficits and a big national debt in a textbook macroeconomics world mean two things, neither of which is actually happening in the United States today. The first thing it means is you have high inflation because people say there's too much of these dollars floating around and they're not worth as much. But that is absolutely not happening in the United States. Like, inflation is heading towards zero. And The second thing is that it's raising interest rates because it's crowding out private investment. That's absolutely not happening. Interest rates are at zero as well, and certainly the private market is not falling over itself to bid them up any higher. And the last thing that becomes a risk is that you turn into Greece, and people just don't trust that you're ever going to pay back your debt. And you know, we're not at that level where people feel like they should be worrying about that in terms of the overall level of debt compared to the size of our economy and the overall amount of the annual deficit to the size of our economy. But that, I think that is a real limit. I mean, and then one of the crazy things about the past couple of months in the global economy is on one day, the Fed says, okay, we're going to like create $2 trillion of new money. And on the next day, everyone in the world says, I want to buy US dollars, which have suddenly, the supply has just like gone up. They've created all of these electronic dollars. And everybody says, I want to dump every other currency and buy US dollars.
Is that what's happening?
Yes. If Portugal had said, or no, Portugal's not a good example. If it's a good country that's not in the euro, you know, let's say Portugal before the euro, for example, or like Mexico. Mexico says, you know what? We need a stimulus, and Mexico is a pretty good virus story. But if Mexico says, we're going to do that, we're going to like create 2 trillion pesos and everybody's going to like, you know, be happy with that. No, everybody would dump the peso and everybody like, I don't trust that they're going to be able to pay back the money, or they're going to inflate their currency and we're going to get back something that's less than what we put into it. None of those normal reactions to very loose monetary policy and very loose fiscal policy has happened. So the answer to the question is, it doesn't look good, and maybe it's something millennials are going to have to clean up later, probably, but not in the short term.
Got it. Let's try to get a couple more questions in. Albert asks, in addition to the national government stimulus response, do you see state, city, or county level responses potentially occurring? And if so, what might those look like? And I would just add, like, do you feel like anything that the state or city does can actually help us get out of this hole the way the federal government, or no?
No, because the thing is the state and the city both have to balance their budget every year. They can't run deficits. Right. Now, they can ask the voters to approve debt. Like, we could put a ballot measure on that says, you know, we're going to borrow a bunch of money and pay it back with higher property taxes. That is a policy option. Those votes need a 2/3 approval. And then you have to be able to really to spend the money. So, I mean, I think the answer to the question is the federal government is the thing that's set up to do that really well. And I think generally everyone is looking to the federal government for that.
My wings look really good. I'm really proud of them. And
that's great.
After this. We're almost done. Don't worry. Kathy asks, how might the economic outlook in San Francisco differ from other big cities that have had more cases per capita, that have had more cases per capita than California, for example, New York? Yeah, because Andrew Cuomo keeps getting on TV and being like, we're fucked, y'all.
Yeah, I mean, it's very bad in New York. I mean, people are getting Airbnbs and moving away from New York, at least temporarily. I mean, if you think about one of the long-term problems, New York and San Francisco are pretty similar cities in the sense that they have a lot of like advanced services and they have a lot of tourism. And being the kind of COVID capital of America is not a great tourism brand. New York suffered a lot after 9/11 for reasons that were not, they're just psychological reasons. And you worry that that's going to happen. I'm worried that's going to happen to travel generally. I don't expect travel to bounce back quickly, but I would hope that San Francisco continues to have a good news virus story and people at least don't fear coming back to San Francisco.
Got it. Okay, let's just try to get a couple more questions. Mark Perlite both wants to say that he loves your backyard and also asks about the city. How is our local government's balance sheet? Are we prepared to weather the storm? That's probably a Ben question, huh?
It's a big question, but I'll give, you know, since you ask, I'll give you the 25 words or less version of the answer, which is, from the city's point of view, the last 10 years have been very good for us fiscally. And we have, you know, $750 million in reserves, various types of reserves that we can draw down in a recession. It's probably not enough to fully offset what we're going to lose in revenue over the next 3 years under a reasonable recession scenario. And so we're going to be talking about cuts, but it's not going to be anything like it's been in the past with the city, I don't think, unless the economy turns much worse than we're now thinking.
Okay. I just want to say we are interviewing Ben Rosenfield, who is the city controller, on Wednesday. So anyone that's tuned in now that is interested in engaging in a conversation with the city controller, who manages, what's Ben's job description?
Well, he's my boss, among other things, and he's the CFO of the city. So he manages the approval of all financial transactions in the city. He signs the payroll checks. He's the chief auditor of the city. He's got a complicated job.
So I'm interviewing him at 7 o'clock on Wednesday. So if you're interested in in listening to the city's controller and me talking to him, of course, you can hear that on Wednesday at 7 o'clock. That's enough for the audience questions. Ted is very reachable. If you want to reach out to Ted, let me know and I can connect you to Ted. How about that? I will also be sharing these slides with everyone that's tuned in. Before we leave, I just want to again ask everyone, I have an internal goal of having 10 more sponsors by the weekend. We're trying to build up our sponsors program. It's a monthly donation so that Manny's can weather what will probably be a long, uncomfortable, and arduous storm. So if you are willing to become a sponsor of Manny's, I would deeply, deeply appreciate it. The link is right above my head. It's joinit.org/o/Manny's. You can also go into the chat box, which everyone has access to, and click on the Join It link. You can make a one-time donation, but much more preferable to join us as a sponsor. I'm trying to get 10 more sponsors, but at the end of the evening, it's 8 o'clock, so we're almost there, people. Also, I want to thank my staff, Jupiter, Sam, and Ram, for putting all this together. Again, you can tag us at Welcome to Manny's. And finally, of course, I want to really thank Ted for spending his precious and valuable free time. It's 8 o'clock on a Friday, for going through this slide with all of you. This is real public service here, you all. And so I just want to publicly thank Ted for taking time out of his busy time and his schedule to spend it with us here at Manny's and with all of you. And thank you for your service. Ted Egan, the chief economist of the city. Ted, you get the last word.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. You're the one who's doing a public service. I'm always happy to talk about economics, and not enough people will listen to me. So thank you for asking those questions.
My pleasure. Everyone have a great weekend, and we'll see you again on Monday. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Ted.
Good night.